Hola, my lovelies. I'm sure that you've been all working very, very hard in your early days of Greek, learning about your verbs and, your alphabet, your pronunciation, all of these things. The purpose of this video is twofold, to introduce you to the Greek verb in general, as well as to introduce you to the present active indicative paradigm, which you have in your textbook in chapter 3, and you also have, ta-da, right here on the board. And I think there's a little bit of glare, which I apologize for, but I do think that you are able to see that, especially when I step to a certain point and the focus is a little bit better. If you're having any trouble at all seeing this on the board, just take a look in your textbook when we get to that part. But first, let me talk through a few of our features of Greek verb. I'm just going to read a little bit from the textbook and try to help you understand it just a little bit better. We are on Lesson 3 in Essentials of New Testament Greek by Ray Summers. Lesson 3, page 11. And he explains one of the essentials for understanding the Greek language is the mastery of the Greek verb system. The verb is usually the key word in the Greek sentence. Remember that. So verbs are really important. It is also the most important part of speech in interpretation. That is at least generally true. As in most languages, the Greek verb has tense, voice, mood, person, and number. So let me talk briefly about what each of these things means and what each one does. Now, tense has to do, when we think of it in English, with past, present, and future. There's another dimension to a Greek verb, and it talks about this in the textbook, and it's very important you understand this. See, in English, tense just has to do with time of action. When did it happen? In New Testament Greek, there is time of action and there is kind of action. All right, and we're going to develop this more as we deal with Greek verbs. But there is time of action and there is kind of action. Time of action is past, present, and future. Now, it's going to be a while before we deal in past tenses, but one of the things you will find in Greek is that there's 4 different past tenses in a manner of speaking. However, kind of action, we basically have 3 options here for kind of action. The kind of action, sometimes the action is progressive, which means it is ongoing. It is continuing. All right, so progressive action is one kind of action. Now, some action is undefined, so it might be ongoing, or it might be just something that happens kind of what we would call punctiliar. It happens in an instant. But either way, that's one kind of action. The action is just simply not defined, and the other action is perfected, which has to do with an action being completed. We may as well write these 3 kinds of action on the board right here, just so you can remember it. So, kind of action. Kind of action. Sorry if you can't see that very well, but again, our options are progressive, undefined. I love that that's a kind of action. And perfected. And again, perfected means that the action is completed. Okay, so those are our kinds of actions. You can freeze frame that later if you want, so I'm going to just go ahead and erase it while we are at it. Okay, so your tense is going to tell you that. We're going to start with indicative verbs, and indicative verbs, time of action is a big deal, as well as kind of action. When we get to some of our other kinds of verbs, time of action is going to kind of phase out, and it's going to have exclusively to do with kind of action. I don't know if I said that right. Time of action is going to fade out, and kind of action is going to be what we exclusively deal with in later verbs. But for now, we are in the indicative, and we will talk about that in just a moment. But first, we must talk about voice. Voice has to do with whether the subject is acting or whether the subject is being acted upon. If you looked at the PowerPoint I gave you for English grammar, I talk about voice from the perspective of English grammar. So for now, let's just summarize this. In English, we have active and passive, and we have both of these in Greek. The active voice means that the subject is acting. So I might say, I am speaking. But you all who are listening to you, we could say that you are being spoken to. So I am speaking would be the active voice, whereas you are being spoken to would be the passive voice, where the subject is being acted upon. Now, Greek has a weird anomaly as far as language is concerned. It also has a third voice. The third voice is called the middle voice. And if we were to grossly oversimplify the middle voice, and if you don't know this, in first year Greek we are going to oversimplify just about everything. And then if you go on to second year Greek, we're going to go ahead and complicate it. And it's going to be a great time. But for now, if we're going to oversimplify the middle voice, it means that the subject is acting upon itself. So if I were to use the speaking illustration in the middle voice, I would say, I am talking to myself. Well, hey there, Professor Vic. Yo, how's it going? You know, that sort of thing. So once again, active is the subject acts, passive is the subject is acted upon, middle, the subject acts upon its voice. Mood. In Greek, moods, as in any mood in language, doesn't mean that the verb is moody. I have these Greek students who are trying to memorize me, and it's really annoying. That's not what we're talking about. As much fun as that would be if Greek verbs had emotions and attitude and all of that. But that's not what we're talking about. Mood has to do with the relation of the verb to reality. So, the first mood we're dealing with is the indicative mood, and the indicative mood is the mood of reality. Reality from the point of view of the speaker. In other words, the indicative verb presents something as reality. All right, now if that doesn't make a lot of sense to you, let me give you a couple of other options that are verbs of not reality, because indicative is really the only verb of reality. Now, if I were to give you a command, I said, hey, get me a cup of coffee. Then you'd probably say, well, get it yourself, Professor Vic. But if you wanted to think about it linguistically instead of just getting that attitude, then you would realize that get me a cup of coffee is an imperative. I've given a command, but the command guarantees nothing about the outcome. So a command, an imperative mood, is not a mood of reality. I could say, oh, I really wish I had a cup of coffee. That would be what we call an optative mood. But again, if I'm wishing for something, I've obviously not got it. And will I ever get it? I don't know. And so that also is not a mood of reality. And so these are a couple of our examples. Another one is what we call a subjunctive, which is like a may or might. When I finish this video, I just might get myself a cup of coffee. Well, it's possible that I might get myself a cup of coffee when I'm done with this video. It's within the realm of possibility, but it's not reality yet. There could be a nuclear holocaust or something before I have a chance to get a cup of coffee. Don't rule it out. Okay, so you get the idea. So indicative is a statement like, I have a cup of coffee. Obviously, I don't right now, but if I did, then I could say that. And again, indicative is a presentation of reality from the point of view of the speaker. And the reason I want to clarify that is because it would be too simplified to say that it is the mood of reality. and not qualify that at all because lies are in the indicative. If I were to say, I am Brad Pitt, that's a statement of reality. Now, it's not even really my perspective. I don't think I'm Brad Pitt as much as we look alike, but obviously, but I am saying that as though it were true. So you can lie in the indicative. It's a presentation of reality, whether true or false, but it is a statement of reality, stated as though it were reality. I hope I'm clarifying what I mean by that. If for any reason I'm not, please send me a text message, send me an email, let me clarify it, because I know this can be a little bit sticky as wickets go. Okay. The next thing we have is person. Person has to do with, there's basically three persons, and I can show you this with reference to our little diagram up here. If I were to write 1, 2, and 3, and we'll just go ahead and write it over here. That is telling you that this is a first-person verb, second-person verb, third-person verb, first, second, third. Let me just give you the next thing as well, and then I'll put these two together, because we have person, and it has to do with whether you're speaking in the first, second, or third person. And we also have number. Number has to deal with whether you are dealing in singular or plural. I realize that you can't see that very well, but that says plural. I promise. I probably should have written it just a little bit bigger. But yes, so Greek verbs have person and number. So if we're in first person singular, now remember that the verb luo means I loose or I destroy. Now I'm going to go with loose rather than destroy for our purposes here. It's the one that's being used in the textbook as well. We have present tense because this is the present active indicative paradigm. So I am loosing. First person is I in Greek. First person singular, I should say, is I. So notice that the I is built into the verb. We do have separate personal pronouns in Greek sometimes that we use, but we don't need them because these personal pronouns are built right into the verb. So I, loose, is a first person singular verb. Lu ice, second person singular, you loose, okay? So this is the second person, or you are loosing, we could say. I am loosing, you are loosing, and then for third person singular, it would be he, she, or it is loosing. How do we know whether it's he, she, or it? Context. Are we dealing with a boy, a girl, or something else? All right, so first person singular, I am loosing. Second person singular, you are loosing. Third person singular, he, she, or it is loosing. If we're going over to plural, the first person plural pronoun is we. So lu amen would be we are loosing. Lu ete would be you are loosing, but you in the plural you. English has this funky anomaly where you can be singular or plural. So sometimes it's helpful to think of, like they say in the South, y'all. Y'all are loosing for the plural. And then loosing is they are loosing. So first person plural is we, second person plural you as in y'all, and third person plural they. Now I want you to notice that we're building everything on this lu. I don't know if you can see this very well. I think you can, but I have the lu in black and I have these in red. Notice that the lu is the same on all of these because we call that the verb stem. And knowing the verb stem lets us know the meaning of the verb, that we are dealing with luo, or I loose. But when we put a different ending on it, when we go from luo to ice, that tells us everything else we need to know. It tells us whether it is a present active indicative verb, whether it's first person and singular. So the stem tells you what verb you're dealing with, but the ending tells you all of the other information. Down here, the bottom one, some verb paradigms. That's what we call this, is a paradigm, or a better way to say it might even be a conjugation. We could call this a verb conjugation. And verb conjugations, some of them have what is called an infinitive. For present active indicative, the infinitive is luine. And infinitive means that we don't know any person and number. There's an infinite number of possibilities of who this might be talking about. And so we use the word to loose. Like, I don't know, I went out to the dog who was chained to the tree to loose him from his chain. Something like that. So the infinitive is to loose. Now, friends, it is going to be very, very, very important that you memorize this paradigm with these endings. We're going to have a lot of paradigms to memorize as we go through first year Greek. And I'm going to give you lots of tricks along the way, but there's not a whole lot of tricks for the very first one. You just got to memorize it. Memorize these endings. I find it helpful to memorize it in a way that I can say it in order. Luo, luis, lui, luamen, luete, luusin, luine. I just memorized them in order. Now, if that doesn't work for you, you might need some sort of a mnemonic device. If you need some help coming up with something like that, let me know and we can work on it. But you gotta memorize this, because once you memorize luo with the endings, watch this. We can take that same verb paradigm, and these endings will cross over to our other verbs. So let's take an example. The verb, one of the verbs we learned, one of my favorites, I don't know why, I just like the sound of it. Blepo. Now, if we say blepo, that means I see. But if we were to say blep, pardon that funky looking beta, but blep, blep ice, what would that mean? You know, you're right. Blep ice would then be you see, because we take the same ending and plug in right here, and it becomes a second person singular present active indicative of blepo. Now, what I did just then was called parsing a verb, and I'm going to have another video on parsing verbs very soon. But because I don't want to put too much in one video, this one's going on a little long as it is. But again, we could take any of the verbs you've learned so far, any of the verbs you're going to learn, and we could plug them in. Let's just go over here, and if we were to say blepusen would be they see. So you see, we could do this with any of these verbs. And so this is quite a bit different than English, friends. English, the words are in fixed forms. Verbs are in fixed forms. But in Greek, it works different. We have conjugations. If any of you have learned Spanish or French or any other conjugation language, this is going to be quite a lot easier. If you haven't, when I first started doing New Testament Greek, I had never learned another second language, and so this was all new to me. But you're going to have to get used to it. It's really not all that hard, I don't think, but there's just a lot of information, and there's a lot of memorization. If you have a hard time understanding the things I said on this video, it is not because you don't understand things well. It is because I'm having some sort of a problem explaining it. There's some sort of miscommunication. So make absolutely sure you follow up with me if there's anything you're not understanding. And stay tuned for the next video, which is going to be about how to parse verbs.